Some animals have the incredible ability to build nests out of just about anything. But with all the work they take to construct, you'd think there was a limit to how big they can make them, right? Wrong. From huge hidden hives to colossal car-consuming colonies, these animal architects know no bounds. So brace yourself, because it's time to suit up and get stuck into some of the most jaw-dropping nests ever discovered. The granddaddy of wasp nests. There are wasps, there are angry wasps, and then there are yellowjackets. These notoriously aggressive predatory pests are famous for their defensive behaviors, which see them swarm and sting repeatedly if they sense danger. Unlike most wasps, these insects tend to build their nests underground inside abandoned rodent burrows, meaning they have just one entrance to defend and protect. At least that's what most yellowjackets do. Although this colony seemed to have missed the memo. Discovered in a shed in Patterson, Louisiana back in 2017, exterminator Jude Verrett was faced with, in his own words,
is the granddaddy of a hornet's nest, European yellowjackets.
This yellowjacket nest had engulfed everything and anything in its way, taking over most of the ground space of the shed. But before he could start removing the nest, Verrett was suddenly bombarded. And it only got worse the further in he ventured. As he began tearing the nest apart with his gloved hands, thousands of wasps emerged and started to attack. They flew at Verrett so viciously that you can barely hear him talking over the sound of their tiny bodies pelting the camera.
Actually, a bear got in here a month or so ago.
But it would take more than thousands, possibly tens of thousands of yellowjackets to stop Verrett from doing his job. Over the course of 45 minutes, he stripped the entire nest from the old storage boxes and garden tools without getting stung even once. Which is incredibly lucky, seeing as the venom in those stings can kill an adult man. Granted, it would have taken about 1,500 stings to kill him, so it's a good thing Verrett was suited and booted instead of undertaking this heroic task in his boxers. Now, if you'd had the chance, how would you have dealt with this hideously huge nest? If you think you'd been brave enough to tackle it head on like Jude Verrett, hit that like button. But if you'd have set the shed on fire and called it a day like I would, hit that subscribe button. Or if you've thought of an equally macho way to destroy this thing, let me know down in the comments. Personally, I'd prefer to nuke the entire site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. The Yellowjackets of Alabama. When the weather starts to get warm, most people in America celebrate with a pool party or a picnic. But in Alabama, residents can have their summer celebrations ruined by the discovery of skin-crawling yellowjacket super nests. Typically, colonies of these ground-dwelling devils form small nests of around 4,000 workers in the summer, which tend to die off during the cold winter. But when winters are mild, more and more of these colonies survive into the following summer. This results in huge colonies that start constructing colossal perennial nests all over the southeastern state, and I really do mean all over. Back in the Alabamian summer of 2006, a colony of over 15,000 yellowjackets completely took over the inside of this old car. They coated the car from window to wheel with the paper-like material that cocoons the inner layers of the nest. This is made from wood fiber that the wasps chew up and mix with their saliva, creating a papery pulp. Then they spit it out and mold it into the shape they need. Although if they're left unchecked and the colony keeps growing, they'll just keep building and building. And that poor car's owner found that out the hard way. But this was just one of a staggering 90 super nests found that year, some of which were in even stranger places, like this one, which was discovered inside an old discarded mattress. You can even see how the critters shaped the inner combs of the nest around the mattress's wiring. They look incredibly similar to a honeycomb, but I promise there's nothing sweet about them. It's in these hexagonal hellscapes that yellowjackets store and raise their eggs, which eventually hatch into even more of the insidious insects. So it's lucky no one was taking a nap on that old mattress, or they might have received a very rude and painful wake-up call. Fortunately, after the sickening summer of 2006, residents were able to rest easy. A string of cold winters returned, killing off any possibility of the perennial yellow jacket revival that was until recently. In 2019, a quiet road in Shelby County was suddenly abuzz with activity when a humongous super nest was discovered on the roadside. At around 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide, researchers estimated that a staggering 15,000 wasps were hunkered inside the papery super nest. It doesn't look like these gigantic pest nests will be going away anytime soon. So if you do decide to visit Alabama in the future, remember to keep your windows rolled all the way up. Florida's freaky yellow jackets. If you thought you were safe from ever seeing a huge yellow jacket nest because you don't live in a southern state, think again. This mind-bogglingly large nest was discovered deep in the woods of Tampa, Florida, and was estimated to be at least 8 feet tall by 6.5 feet wide. The frightening footage you see here was filmed by insect expert Jonathan Simpkins, who claimed that, in his 20 years of experience, he'd never seen a nest this huge. As they started to swarm defensively, he estimated that there were literally millions of worker wasps crawling around inside, along with thousands of queens. Usually yellow jacket nests are founded by a single egg-laying queen called the foundress. She's the one who lays the eggs that develop into new workers and wasp queens. While the new wasp queens typically fly off to found their own nests, the workers stay, although most of them are eventually killed off by cold winter weather. But if a nest manages to survive not just one, but multiple mild winters, like this Tampa abomination, which Simpkins claims was around 4 years old, it just continues to grow. This allows it to harbor multiple egg-laying queens, resulting in million-strong swarms that make you want to run and hide. Despite their apocalyptic numbers, Simpkins stormed in and neutralized the colony over the course of just 2 days. As thankful as I am, can you imagine how big that nest could have gotten if it had been left for a few more years? Yikes. Backseat buzz. Now that you've seen just how aggressive yellow jackets can be, would you ever get in a car with a whole nest of them? For most sane people, the answer is obviously no way in hell. But as it turns out, Jude Verrett is not most sane people. This exterminator extraordinaire was once again called out to South Louisiana, where someone had discovered a huge yellow jacket nest that had completely overrun an abandoned Chevy Malibu. Much like their Alabama cousins, this perennial colony was only able to get car-consumingly big thanks to the warm southern climate. But instead of reaching for a flamethrower, Verrett put on his equipment, threw open the door, and hopped right in, just for a laugh. He even invited his friend to join him, though one look at the front seat was enough to make them think twice. Rather than run for the hills, his buddy then tried the back seat, only to discover the nest had fully embedded itself in every crevice of the car. Look, you can even see it bulging through the air vents. After seeing that, I think I'll take the bus. Classic car colony. But it's not just yellow jackets that are capable of adding a little junk to a car's trunk. Back in 2018, bee removal specialist Travis Watson was called out to tackle a gigantic nest which had taken over an old El Camino. Or should I say, Hell Camino. When he arrived, he quickly realized that this wasn't just any old nest, but one belonging to an angry colony of European hornets. This massive breed of wasp has workers that can reach over an inch in length, as you can see from the size of them compared to his thumb. Could you imagine something that huge crawling over your thumb? I think I'd prefer to cut my whole hand off. Fortunately, Watson was a true professional, and instead of recovering his limbs, he began gently smoking out the car. Smoke blocks out pheromones that wasps, hornets, and bees release to communicate with one another. Without being able to coordinate, they can't swarm, preventing an organized and painful attack. This ingenious tactic gave Watson plenty of time to pull the papery nest apart calmly and carefully, which took him just a matter of minutes. Although he'd brought a sizable plastic bag to dump the nest in, it was much larger than he'd first anticipated.
Gonna need a bigger bag.
But like some kind of Mary Poppins style miracle, he managed to fit it all in there. I can only commend him for such an effort. I myself would have set the whole thing on fire and prayed the hornets never found out where I lived. How would you have dealt with this nest? Let me know down in the comments. New home nest. When you buy a new house, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. The electricity might be faulty, the pipes might be a little leaky, or like new homeowner Zhang Juai, you might find a 6-foot wasp nest hanging perilously from your ceiling. The house Mr. Zhang had bought, which is in China's Henan province, had been left unoccupied for over a year. But by the time Zhang finally decided to furnish the property, wasps in the area had already moved in. Fortunately, the giant dangling structure was long abandoned as the wasps had died of starvation the previous winter. Although that still left Mr. Zhang with the conundrum of how to remove such a massive natural monument. Was he meant to burn it or chop it down? Personally, I'd have been tempted to turn it into a piñata. But Zhang saw the nest as something of a gift, so he enlisted the help of the local authorities to help him saw it down in one piece. They allowed him to keep the nest, though it's not entirely clear what he did with it. Perhaps he turned it into some sort of artsy centerpiece for his new home. Though hopefully he triple-checked the nest was wasp-free, as I don't imagine those insects would make the friendliest roommates. The Tennessee Bee Whisperer. As enticing as empty homes are to nesting insects, the rooms aren't the only spaces they like to haunt. Warm, shielded hollows inside the walls of some houses provide the perfect spots to build new nests, as one unlucky homeowner discovered. He'd hired a local pest control company after noticing bees clambering in and out of the outer wall of his house. But despite their best extermination efforts, the clever critter survived, forcing him to turn to Tennessee's premier bee whisperer, also known as David Glover. First, Glover got a feel for just how big the hidden hive really was by using a thermal camera. After checking the readings, he was staggered by the size of the colossal heat signature. With no other way to get to the heart of the hive, Glover started smoking the entrances before prizing each individual brick away from the wall. He slowly worked his way down until the entire colony was completely exposed, revealing a massive set of 3-foot wide, 5-foot tall combs. It took Glover more than 4 hours to safely separate all the honeycomb from the protective stingers of 35,000 honeybees. But eventually the entire hive was removed and relocated. So if you're in Tennessee and have your own beehive burdens, be sure to give this guy a buzz. Getting comfy. Don't you hate it when you invite guests over to stay in your guest bedroom, but they just won't take the hint to leave? With humans, it's so annoying. But when a nest of wasps moves in, like they did in this house in Winchester, England, it's an honest-to-God nightmare. This was the scene that greeted pest controller John Burkett after a homeowner discovered the nest lining the bed of her spare room. She hadn't used the room in months, but had left a small window open, giving the wasp ample opportunity and time to take over the bed. Measuring in at a huge 3 feet wide on the surface, the wasp had chewed through the pillow and bedding to make their nests even larger on the inside. According to Burkett, it would have taken at least 3 months for the wasp to build a nest that size, which accommodated a frightening 5,000 of the winged beasties. While they chewed up almost everything on the bed, Burkett was fortunately able to save that incredibly fetching crocheted blanket. Thank God something was saved, because my sanity sure hasn't been. Terrifying termites. Now, it's not just bees and wasps that can build nauseatingly huge nests, and that's proven by the discovery made by Australia's Forensic Pest Management Services. They were called out to a house in the suburbs of Sydney where an old termite colony had been found. Not in a mound in the ground, as you might expect, but in the very walls of the property. One branch of it was so large that it took up an entire drywall cavity from floor to ceiling. Though the termites had been exterminated, this nest had once been thriving with thousands of drywood termites, a type of pest that feeds on the cellulose in dry wood. This makes empty sections of drywall the perfect place for them to hide, allowing them to create hundreds if not thousands of maze-like tunnels from the inside out. As more and more sections of the wall were torn away, it became clear that this nest had been built up inside the house over several years, at least. Although I don't know what's worse, knowing someone lived with that huge infestation for all that time, or that hideous neon green wall paint. Ugh. Either way, I'm glad that room got the wrecking it so clearly deserved. Eric Critter McCool. Back in 2014, the sleepy town of Moncks Corner, South Carolina was given one hell of a wake-up call when a monstrous insect mound was discovered lurking in a storage yard. Without hesitation, they called in local bee extraction expert Eric Critter McCool. But these weren't no bees, they were yellowjackets, ones which had formed some colossal nests in an old fold-down camper. Shocked by the sheer size of what he was looking at, McCool filmed the beginning of the extraction, which would turn out to be one of the largest in history. He estimated it to be a gargantuan 10 foot long, 7 foot wide, and 2 feet tall, meaning it contained around 350,000 wasps. Fortunately, McCool wasn't fazed by this and began tearing the entire nest to shreds, removing 37 of the queens by hand as he did so. With those nerves of steel, this guy is clearly McCool by name and McCool by nature. Wonderful weaver's nest. As incredible as nests built by insects can be, they are nothing in comparison to the elaborate treetop roosts that birds can build, specifically sociable weaver birds. These unbelievable birds build large, permanent nests in the trees of southern Africa. So large, they can house up to 400 birds at once. This makes them some of the largest structures known to be built by birds, which is a massive feat when you consider that they're only about 5.5 inches long. But how does something so small create something so huge? Well, as you can imagine, it takes a lot of teamwork. They use different materials for different purposes, so large twigs make up the roof while softer plant materials and cotton line the nesting chambers. As more chambers are added on, the ever-growing nest begins to resemble a hay bale that's been launched into a tree, or on occasion a particularly appealing telephone pole. But as haphazard as they look, the structural integrity of these massive mounds is second to none. In fact, they're so sturdy that some nests have accommodated generations of sociable weavers for over 100 years. Now that's one hell of an inheritance. Caterpillar chaos. Now this next insect takeover isn't exactly a nest, but it certainly consumed everything in its path. Back in 2018, this tree in North Yorkshire, England, drew a lot of attention after onlookers saw it was completely coated, branch to trunk, in a mysterious white slime. With all that ooze, it seemed like it had been plucked straight out of a horror film. But as locals braved a closer look, they made a shocking discovery. It wasn't slime coating the tree, it was webbing. The entire area had been infested by thousands of moth caterpillars, which had worked together to spin these huge sheets of silk webbing. Usually moth caterpillar webs like this are small and, for the most part, unnoticeable, which is just as well, as the silk blankets protect the caterpillars from the eyes of any nearby predators, like birds and wasps. Brilliantly, this tiny silk canopy provides a safe haven in which they can gorge themselves on food before they start to pupate into moths later in the year. But they're not always so subtle. Warm summers can encourage huge outbreaks of the insects, allowing them to create these huge communal webs with tens of thousands of caterpillars crawling around inside them. Ugh. Forget the caterpillars, it's my skin that's crawling. The German wasp nest. With a name like the German wasp, it's tempting to imagine these little insects hilariously wearing lederhosen and snacking on schnitzel. But the reality of what these wicked wasps can do isn't as funny as it is terrifying, something that New Zealand found out back in 2019. Lurking in the wilds of the North Island city of Rotorua, German wasps had created this bulbous abomination nearly 10 feet up a ponga tree. Measuring in at a gargantuan 6.5 feet tall, with a 6.5 foot circumference, local experts estimated that this thing must have weighed somewhere between 220 and 330 pounds. At the top end, that's the same weight as an average sumo wrestler, though you wouldn't have wanted to fight this thing in the ring. Mainly because, unlike a sumo wrestler, it was estimated to be holding close to 1 million wasps. As big as that may seem, it's nothing in comparison to the world record title holder of largest wasp nest, which coincidentally was also found in New Zealand. Not only that, but it was also made by German wasps way back in 1963. According to the reports, it measured in at a staggering 12.2 feet long and had a circumference of over 18 feet. Its gargantuan size made it so heavy that it apparently fell out of the tree it had been constructed in. Sounds like some pretty poor engineering if you ask me. With that said, were they really German wasps? La Avispa Loca. As large as you've seen these nests can get, the discovery of a truly unusual nest on the Canary Island of La Gomera threw its residents into a state of sheer disbelief. Locals of the beautiful San Sebastian raised their concerns back in 2013 about an old house in the city, which had apparently been abandoned. Insects were clambering in and out of the walls, and an incessant buzzing could be heard from behind the front door. Officers were called out to investigate, but what they discovered stopped them dead in their tracks. Behind the front door, a colossal wasp nest had overtaken the entire inner hallway of the house. Millions upon millions of wasps reportedly began to swarm as the grounded nest was active and teeming with the incessant insects. Experts were called in to assess the situation and reported the nest to be an astonishing 21.9 feet in length. At that size, it would have been about the same length as a small school bus, although I don't think anyone would have dared to ride that thing, even if you'd paid them. The experts later explained that the wasps were an invasive species, likely from Africa, as local wasps weren't capable of building a nest that large. The home was then cordoned off as police tried to locate the owners of the property and determined how best to handle that titanic nest. Surely the only realistic solution would have been to kill that absolute abomination with fire. I'm talking flamethrowers, Molotov cocktails, maybe even a grenade or two, right? I mean, it's the only way to be sure. Which of these huge nests made your jaw hit the floor? And have you ever seen a nest even bigger than these? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.